should be topic number 7 is a continuation of last week. What is the function of religion or spirituality for people? How can atheism tackle the human condition of a collective? Keyword being collective. This came with a link. I believe it's a tweet. No, it's YouTube. It's YouTube. Let's check it out.
Learn more about our membership, access transcripts, and the art we use in the videos by visiting academyofideas.com. The least of all things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. We live in a world consumed by an endless series of crises, but of all the crises we face, the one that may be of the greatest concern is one that receives relatively little attention, and this is the crisis of meaning. In his essay, The Aims of Psychotherapy, Carl Jung called this the general neurosis of our times, and as he explains further, the lack of meaning in life is a soul sickness whose full extent and import our age has not yet begun to comprehend. This crisis reaches back several generations. In the late 19th century, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed that nihilism, or what he termed the radical repudiation of meaning, was on the rise in the West. Was this the result of the fall of the Christian worldview and the rise of a scientific, reductionist, and mechanistic worldview? Was the death of God the most momentous event of the modern era? Nietzsche, writes Walter Kaufmann, felt the agony, the suffering, and the misery of a godless world so intensely, at a time when others were yet blind to its tremendous consequence, that he was able to experience in advance, as it were, the fate of a coming generation. We are now experiencing the fate that Nietzsche prophesied, a fate where, in the words of Viktor Frankl, ever more people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for, a fate which is manifesting in a hatred of the existing society, the apocalyptic sense of an ending, and the need for some kind of worthy cause to give meaning to one's life. In this video, we are going to explore what meaning in life is and why it is so important. We will then examine why the decline in religion may be the prime cause of this modern crisis of meaning and a prime factor in the widespread occurrence of anxiety disorders, neuroses, and depression. Happiness, writes Ian McGilchrist, is about the present moment, independent of other moments, whereas meaning links events across time, thus integrating past, present, and future. Meaning in a human life is grounded in narrative. A life narrative is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, and this story acts as a sort of cognitive organizing process that helps us make sense of who we are and where we are going. Our narrative gives rise to and sustains our sense of self, and just like a novel or movie, it is defined by a particular plot or theme. This theme can be coherent and life-affirming, or it can be disjointed, disempowering, incoherent, and so lacking in meaning. The less meaning our life has, the more we will suffer, and this is exemplified by the experience of many schizophrenics who struggle to view life through the coherence of a narrative. In Madness and Modernism, Louis Sass quotes a schizophrenic patient who said, "I feel as if I've lost the continuity linking the events in my past. Instead of a series of events linked by continuity, my past just seems like disconnected fragments." And as McGilchrist explains concerning this disturbing lack of a coherent life narrative, if your world disintegrates through a lack of narrative, you stop seeing anything in context, and it becomes puzzling, even frightening. Its sheer facticity then stands out, since it can no longer take its place in any world schema of other things and people that would give it meaning. While most people do not suffer the disintegrating effect of no life narrative, what many lack is a satisfying narrative that is rich in meaning. A narrative, in other words, that creates fulfillment and enables one to cope with the existential conditions of life. The great prevalence of anxiety disorders, depression, addictions, and psychotropic and illicit drug use is evidence which points to this dire lack of meaning, and as Jung notes, meaninglessness inhibits fullness of life and is therefore equivalent to illness. To make matters worse, while many people feel that their life is missing something, most do not realize that what is missing is meaning. Instead, To fill this void of meaninglessness, many people chase after more money and material goods, elevated social status, increased knowledge, or most of all, moments of pleasure and happiness. But none of these things are adequate replacements for, as McGilchrist explains, people who report being happy but have little or no sense of meaning in their lives have the same gene expression patterns as people who are enduring chronic adversity, such as loneliness, bereavement, or poverty. Given the importance of meaning, how can a life lacking it be infused with it? How, in other words, can we discover a more meaningful life narrative? While there are many practical steps to move us in this direction, from finding a life purpose, to cultivating interpersonal relationships, to confronting life's challenges, one of the most effective is to tap into the wisdom embedded in the mythos of the great religions. What is the use of a religion without a mythos? Asks Jung, since religion means, if anything at all, precisely that function which links us back to the eternal myth. Mythos, or what is more commonly called myth or mythology, contains truths about the human predicament and the nature of the psyche that are expressed in narrative form. These narratives can be used to augment our own personal narrative with rich threads of meaning, as they provide insights for how to cope with elements of the human condition, be it freedom, loss, loneliness, sickness, old age, suffering, or death. In the modern day, many of us have relegated myth to the realm of fiction, believing that only reason, logic, and science, or what is called the domain of logos, can reveal to us the truths of the world. But as Jung writes, myth is not fiction. It consists of facts that are continually repeated and can be observed over and over again. Both logos and mythos are realms for discovering truth, but the truths they reveal are of a different nature. Science teaches us the neurological correlates behind the phenomenon of pain. Mythos teaches us how to meaningfully endure pain. Science teaches us how to cure a sickness. Mythos teaches us how to meaningfully cope with loss and death. Or as Karen Armstrong explains, logos, or reason, is the pragmatic mode of thought that enables people to function effectively in the world. People have always needed logos to make an efficient weapon, organize their societies, or plan an expedition. Logos is continually on the lookout for new ways of controlling the environment and is essential to the survival of our species. But logos has its limitations. Good at manipulating the world and making us powerful, it does not contribute to any broader understanding of the meaning of our lives. For that, people turn to mythos. We can gain exposure to the realm of mythos through great works of literature, be it those of Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, or Cervantes. But the great religions are the ultimate source of this wisdom. For the primary purpose of religion, from time immemorial, has been to help us cope with our existential predicament and to find meaning in life, even if this purpose has at times been corrupted by religion in its organized and institutional forms. Not only Christianity with its symbols of salvation, writes Jung, but all religions, including the primitive with their magical rituals, are forms of psychotherapy which treat and heal the suffering of the soul and the suffering of the body caused by the soul. And in a speech given to a group of psychotherapists in the 1930s, he further explains, "It is not a play on words when I call religion a psychotherapeutic system. It is the most elaborate system, and there's a great practical truth behind it." As an example of how one can put the mythos of religion to use, Jung explores the symbolic notion of the imitation of Christ. Is not Jesus, he asks, a prototype of those who, trusting their inner experience, have gone their individual ways in defiance of the world? The imitation of Christ is the notion that Jesus' life should be used as a template for how to live. According to St. Augustine, emulating Christ was the fundamental purpose in the life of a good Christian. But as Jung explains, the traditional interpretation of the imitation of Christ, as counseling that we strive to live as Christ did, has this disadvantage. In the long run, we worship as a divine example a man who embodied the deepest meaning of life, and then, out of sheer imitation, we forget to make real our own deepest meaning, self-realization. Jung suggests that the imitation of Christ should be interpreted in a symbolic manner as the call to go our own way and to strive to develop ourselves as fully as is humanly possible. For Jung saw Christ as an example of someone who actualized himself completely and who was unafraid to follow his conscience, even if it ended in his persecution. Christ, in other words, was an example of a heroic personality. The imitation of Christ, explains Jung, might well be understood in a deeper sense. It could be taken as the duty to realize one's deepest conviction with the same courage and the same self-sacrifice shown by Jesus. The imitation of Christ is but one example in the deep well of practical wisdom embedded in the great religions. And to profit from this wisdom, we do not need to become a follower of an organized religion, nor must we pledge allegiance to any specific sect or creed. For as many organized religions are corrupted by power and degraded by politics, they can be barriers to accessing the authentic truths of religion. Fortunately, profiting from the truths of the great religions can be accomplished through a personal effort. Reading the texts, learning about the various rituals embedded in the mythology, and most importantly, putting into practice what we learn can give rise to a religious outlook on life. Or as Karen Armstrong explains, the only way to assess the value and truth of any myth is to act upon it. The myth of the hero, for example, which takes the same form in nearly all cultural traditions, showed us how to live more richly and intensely, how to cope with our mortality, and how creatively to endure the suffering that flesh is heir to. But if we failed to apply it to our situation, a myth would remain abstract and incredible. For the truths of religion to impact our life, we do not need to fully understand their meaning. For myths, like dreams, are encoded in symbolic form, and so they point in the direction of truths that are not fully comprehensible by the conscious intellect. But as Jung explains, we like to imagine that something which we do not understand does not help us in any way. But that is not always so. Myths have a direct effect on the unconscious, no matter whether it is understood or not. The fact that its repeated telling has not long since become obsolete can, I believe, be explained by its usefulness. In the modern world, many of us have completely severed our connection to the realm of mythos, and many of us view religion with derision and scorn. Some consider this as a sign of enlightenment and progress, but it may be a form of psychological regression. In a lecture delivered to Yale University in 1937 titled Psychology and Religion, Jung went as far as to call atheism the urban neurosis, and in his decades of practice treating hundreds of patients, he came to the conclusion that for some patients, the only means of fixing what ailed them was the birth of a religious attitude to life. Among those in the second half of life, he wrote, that is to say, over 35, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. If we continue to spurn religion, we will not lose our need for meaning. We will merely look for meaning in other places. We will worship the state, a political party, or science, all of which are inadequate and sometimes dangerous substitutes to the cultivation of an authentic religious outlook on life. Perhaps, therefore, we need the mythos of religion to nourish our psyche and imbue our life with meaning and purpose. Perhaps without some form of a religious outlook, man descends into the chaos of nihilism, totalitarianism, and hatred of self and society. And for those who think science has done away with our need for religion, Jung poses the following question: can science be so sure that there is no such thing as a religious instinct? Become a supporting member and access 12 courses and over.
All right. So this is a continuation from last week's discussion. What is the function of religion or spirituality for people? How can atheism tackle the human condition of a collective, keyword being collective? Before we get to the panelists, Harsh Rally Podcast is here. He said, I said it once, I'll say it again. If you don't give the 85%ers something to worship, someone else will. Spirituality is inherent in people and a tenet of any successful society to be honest. Simple as that. I'll just read this response to that from Trigger Happy 262. He says to the Harsh Rally podcast, Kwame Ture has an excellent analysis of this. All people have religion. It's just some cultures that were a culture of scarcity use their religion as a vehicle of war. So there's a lot of other great comments going on between Afro Native World, Keter, and Trigger Happy 262. You guys, when you listen to the playback, just tune into the chat as well around now. Real good discussion going back and forth there. So you guys should check it out. Carl, I'm sorry. Carl, what say you to this?
What are my thoughts on this? Well, I think that when I look at it, he's talking about religion. Nietzsche, he's referred to the death of God. And that's kind of my bag. Shout out to my philosophy professor. We talked about the death of God. He's referring to the need of people to depend on religious institutions. Like, for example, it was a time when you got hurt, you went to a shaman, you went to a witch doctor. Now you go to a hospital. So now he's saying the preponderance of science over the religious ethic is means that God is dead. Not to debate Nietzsche or whatnot, but I feel like atheism forces people to deal with their real conditions. I said previously that religion was the opiate of the masses. So when you don't have a belief in a God, you have to deal with the real world facts, deal with the real issues on the ground. There's nobody coming to save you. There's no hereafter that where you're going to get your by and by in the sky. That's not happening. So what do? Do you just give up? Do you just completely uh, give into nihilism, or do you really look into yourself and say, what can I do to change my material conditions in this world, to where religion isn't necessary? And I think that this person who's talking right now, he's talking about the increase in mental disorder. That's because of the conditions that we live under, the conditions of capitalism, of oppression, that are driving people towards, you know, mental illness. Not so much of a lack of religion. Religion, like I said, is just to put a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it doesn't deal with the real conditions. It makes you feel good. It just makes you, feel better. Or you're homeless, but Jesus was homeless. When you ignore the fact that there are more empty houses than there are people, and everybody could easily be housed. Just using that as an example. But because you have religion, oh, I feel better now because Jesus knows my suffering. No, bitch, give me one of them empty houses that are sitting there. That's kind of how I look at it. So I don't really see atheism as against, you know, finding meaning, because when you can find meaning in your liberation, find meaning in your people, because this religious stuff is not, it's not working. That's why the increase of atheism is going on in the Western world right now. And it was something that I remember reading about Herodotus back in the so-called father of history. When he went to ancient Egypt, and he said the Egyptians were the most religious people in the world. They had a god for everything. So I think that kind of comes down to us, the African people. We tend to be more religious than the European, but that could be in our culture. But I just feel like atheism is not against meaning, but you have to deal with the real world, you have to deal with the reality of the situation, not falsehood and dreams and myths and whatnot. Myths were used to explain you know why things existed. You had people who didn't know why the sun rose, why there are rainbows, why do these things exist. So they come up with myths. They come up with things to help them understand the natural world. The Mayans believed, the Aztecs believed that every time the sun set, it died. That's why the sun was red, because it was blood. You needed blood for the sun to rise. They would sacrifice a person to bring the sun back to life. It was nonsense, but that's how they used to interpret their world around them. So that's the function of religion, to explain natural phenomenon, if you ask me, and to deal with meaning. But we don't need that. If you want to hold on, that's fine. Just make sure your religion has something to do with your oppression as African people, and we can go from there. But that's just my thoughts on that.
Carl, the Harsh Valley podcast says shamans or medicine men still use herbs and national remedies. They didn't just pray away disease. I agree with that take. I'm assuming whoever's talking about your take. Also, we know the power of things like placebos or faith and healing the mind. Trigger Happy 262 says directly to you, this is why it needs to be emphasized that African people's spirituality was always about action. You never waited for anything, and us waiting is due to an Abrahamic and neo-colonial lens. What say you to those comments, Carl?
Well, I mean, if you break your leg, are you going to the shaman? You going to the hospital? I'm just asking. Where you going? Are you going to you get your baby has a fever for 102? Are you going to the shaman or are you going to the hospital? That's my response to that. And the second comment, I agree with that. It has to be a action. You know, we can't sit back and what do they say? Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. You know, enough waiting. He's had enough of his way. We need to do for ourselves. You know, if he's going to support us, he's going to support us as we move. But this whole waiting and being patient, you know, we don't have time for that.
I appreciate that, Carl. Let's mix it up a little bit. Only, what say you?
Yeah, okay. How about that? What can I say? That's why this video just reminds me that I just do not like white people. I mean, like this is just such like this white boy just puts up this propaganda piece for religion somehow, and he just makes it seem like he's so authoritative and so researched, but nothing he's saying really adds up. Like at one point he's like, hey, depressed people, no, people who are happy have the same gene pattern as people who are depressed. And it's like, what do you mean the same gene pattern? Like, what are you talking about right now? You know, like, are you talking about they could be siblings? Like, I mean, or are you saying that, you know, or are you saying that your measurement is just off? Or even that, it's like, then he goes on to say, well, if you're atheist, you're not happy. Are religious people happy? I mean, because we all know they're not, you know? And then he's like, you know, here, how are we going to, because I made a list. He's like, how are we going to heal for the suffering of the soul? You just made up a problem. You know, I mean, if you're technically a atheist, if you will, you're not even saying that you have like there are souls and stuff. So if that's the case, you saying, well, how are you going to deal with the suffering of the soul? You're kind of inventing the problem and then coming up with then offering a solution for the problem you invented. And I was going to say, it reminds me of the whole, you know, like how the Abrahamics, you know, made us consciously shame nudity, right? And so they just like, you know, you didn't have a problem, you know, being nude, let's say, and then all of a sudden you got a huge problem and they're like, oh, well, here's a solution, here's some clothes or some shit. But it's just like, yeah, if you create a problem, sure, you can offer a solution, but then the trouble is that you created the problem. So for me, for instance, I'm not suffering, my soul isn't suffering. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't experience that. But sure, if I felt like my soul was suffering, then obviously I might look at you for the remedy. But that's you creating the problem. That's your, you know, the social construct of the problem, if you will. Lastly, the other part he said was, you know, without religion, you know, man descends into totalitarianism and hatred and nihil. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Were these people not religious when they did this totalitarianism, this slavery, this, like, come on. Like these white boys just make shit up. And the thing is that they get banked for doing this, you know, or they get into black spaces. You know, we all African people, and we are sitting by listening to this white boy talk about this totally illogical, totally irrational argument for, well, that's why you need to buy into the lies. Shaking my damn head. Those are the comments that I got from the video. But as far as what the question is concerned with, like I said, you know, the human, like if you decide that humans have a problem inherently to deal with, you know, their lack of fulfillment from logic, right? If you decide that is a problem, then sure, you might say, what's the solution to that? But that's not a real problem. You get what I'm saying? Humans are living their lives, you know, like for instance, like my son, like for instance, I can tell y'all this. My son, probably the happiest person, y'all, you know, probably the happiest person most people see. You know, just a smiley, happy child. No myths. I'm not saying he don't watch like cartoons and shit. or YouTube videos and shit, if that's what you want to call myths. But as far as Zeus and Jesus, you know what I'm saying? As far as those two, yeah, you rock with that, and he's perfectly happy. And I mean, you might say, well, why is it going to be when he's older? No. Again, if you are in societies that are fostering unhappiness and fostering this sort of belief that, oh, well, your life has no meaning and all that shit. Like, what do you like? This is the white boys. Like I can't. This is the thing I don't like about white folks, is that how they can just infiltrate black spaces. And I'm not saying I don't like videos from white folk. I mean, obviously, right? But what I'm saying is they can just infiltrate black spaces with their own psychopathy, their own mental weaknesses, their own mental illnesses, and it's passed off like it's normal for the rest of us. We happy, we don't need this, Hera and we don't need that, and what's more, the difference is that these religions, like, it's different if you're like, hey, these are allegories, these are metaphors, because I remember I read Siddhartha when I was a kid, and I was like, I like that, I rock with that. But if you read it as a piece of fiction and you say, well, I could take a lesson from fiction, that's different. But what these religions are doing is they're trying to pass them off as facts, and that's where it's a problem. Where you sitting down believing, if I put my hands together, some cosmological being is going to be listening to me. That's a problem. That's psychopathic. And then you're going to really feel unfulfilled because you're like, am I praying hard enough? Because I'm not getting that rainbow with the leopard, with the gold on the edge. Because you're doing something that don't make no damn sense. That's when it's a problem. But if you read it like, hey man, it's a story of a guy who's living his life, and that's different. A guy who believed that he was the son of a cosmological being. His mother got impregnated, but she was a virgin. Yeah, okay. If you believe that, that's fine. But again, this is just white folk pushing off their stuff, trying to make it seem like they're being subjective and things, but they're really just telling you they're a bunch of fucking psychopaths, and we really need to just distance ourselves from them. That's all I'm gonna say.
Woo! Drop a 1 if you like that, 2 if you don't. But that was some good stuff there, Oni. Let me see what Sister Tanzan says. Continuation of last week. What is the function of religion, spirituality for people? How can atheism tackle the human condition of a collective? Keyword collective. Go ahead, Tan.
First of all, I don't think that atheism you can't form a belief around negation. It's like, oh, we don't believe in this and that. That's not something that's very unifying for people. You can form a belief around something, but not around the lack of something. So, straight, to the COVID, atheism cannot, replace religion. And in fact, for me, atheism is simply a reaction to theism. So there's no atheism without religion, and they both go together. So if atheism is in Africa, neither is religion, and vice versa. But in order for that, that instinct, I think it's more of a collective instinct towards something higher. So first of all, the first thing is collective, and the second of all, it's supposed to be transcendental. So it's higher than humans. And the first thing is, this whole approach about it is, the idea of meaning. So for I think in Western philosophy, they approach this questions of what is beyond and what is the unknown with different questions than what we or some cultures approach it with. Mostly Africans, you have a relationship with it, you have a mastery over it, but it's not a dissection or an analysis of how exactly these things work. It's how you can use it to make it work for you. So even in the search for meaning, what they're talking about, the existential crisis, oh, why are we here, why are things the way they are, and so on, those are questions that are, they seem obvious and inevitable in the Western psyche, but they're not necessary in some other cultures. For them, they have to figure out exact nature of God, the omniscient, transcendent, omnipresent, and all that stuff. And there's a need for an authoritative word, final word on matters where everybody can refer to. So that's a different way of looking at things than us. So I think there's still a spiritual instinct, but it's going to be satisfied different ways. For some people it's religion, for some people it's personal, so for some people it's individualistic. And unfortunately, the Western search for meaning has been mostly an individualistic search for it. Why am I here? Not why are we here as a people? Why are we here as a community? And so on. So it's only been, why was I born? What is my function? What is my duty? What is my, destiny? And so on. So that kind of questioning angle will get you into a dead end, because there is no reason why any one particular person is here, not even the greatest person in the world, because even if you're the greatest, you're still going to eventually die and leave it on to somebody else. So you're not the final arbiter of right and wrong, or what is and what isn't. So those kinds of questions will lead to alienation, depression, nihilism in the Western system, because there is a need for definition. There's not just definition of defining something, but something that's absolute. That's it. They say that this is the final answer to things, and this is how things are. And for some people, it's not so much making things concrete. It's creating relations. How do you relate to other people? How do you act towards yourself and towards others? Those are different questions. That why am I here? Why is there God? Why is the sky green? And so on. So yeah, for them, if you ask questions a certain way, you'll end up with a certain maze, and you'll never really be satisfied, whether with science, religion, and so on. And I think that some questions are just not worth asking. And we should go back to more more important questions are the questions that relate to mankind and the earth, the things that we can see rather than those that we can't. So for me, I would think that instead of religion and meaning and existentialism, that spirituality should serve a way of bringing people together and dealing with those personal things that they encounter. So for us, for the example, the medicine man was a holistic healer. He looked at both the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, all aspects of the person, whereas in Western it's more specialized. You have somebody to look at your mental health, somebody else to look at your physical health, somebody else, and even with the physical health, there's a specialist of this and that and that. So you already split into pieces, and you can't really be one. So even the idea of of one God is not sensible in such a society where we're used to being multiple of our own selves. So yeah, the function of religion and spirituality is to take care of the personal needs, whether it's the needs for answers, for certainty, for healing, for guidance. And I think it should be more for guidance than for commands. So you should guide people towards treating other people morally, rather than commanding them to do one thing or another. And there should be consequences to it that are agreed upon by community. So the main aspect should be the community, the people, rather than looking towards something outside of that, whether it's a book, whether it's somebody, the God, or something outside of it. And atheism, can it tackle the human collective? My answer would be, no.
I appreciate that, Tan. Chat is really doing a good job, man. Real good conversation out there. Sister Raw is talking about how a guy almost chopped his foot off with a rusty cutlass, and they brought him back. They healed him with herbs and holistic medicine. Keter, Trigger Happy 262, and Afro Native World are having a real robust conversation. You guys, again, check out the chat replay when you guys listen to this in the playback. Real good conversation going on. Harsh Rally Podcast is in the mix as well. Anyone has any last words on this prompt? Let's go to Shooter Breeze topic number 8 then. We might finish early tonight.